Most people know about the CJ5s and CJ7s. Not many people have seen the CJ8 Scrambler. The CJ8 Scrambler is a little different than the Wranglers in that it's kind of pickup truck style. Think of it as a two-door Gladiator. Now, a couple of interesting things about this one is it doesn't actually have the original engine that it would have come with. This one has been swapped to a Chevy 350. So about double the power. Yeah, and Chevy reliability, Chevy 350s are as common as they are for good reason. This one's also been fuel injected, which is a huge important thing in Colorado, just because of our elevation changes. You know, you go from Colorado Springs at 6,000 feet, you might go over a mountain pass to 11,000 feet. If you're on a carbureted vehicle, when you get to the top, it's going to be running really rich. So fuel injection is able to use the oxygen sensors in the exhaust and make adjustments while you drive to make sure everything's running like it's supposed to. The original complaint here is after about 30 to 40 minutes of driving, it would just shut off. You would lose power. I guess it never actually stalled completely, but it would start to lose power. And you know, we deal a lot with, you know, my car won't run at all problems. Not too many. My car runs perfectly fine until the 30 to 40 minute mark, and then it sucks. All I have to do is turn it off, turn it back on. That's not common for automotive issues. So we started looking into the electrical system, so the battery, the alternator, and the starter. And the battery tested low, which is relatively common if there's also an alternator problem. So we got the Jeep running, we test the alternator. It's not putting out any voltage. So we started by changing out the alternator. The alternator here is not the same as what the Jeep originally had because it has a Chevy engine. What we found was that there are two terminals on here and there was only one of them being used. That would be this wire here. This just goes back to the alternator's output. But there was no wire here. This wire is what they call the excite wire. When you turn the key on, this is given 12 volts. And that's basically what tells the alternator to begin generating voltage. And when that 12 volts disappears, the alternator stops outputting voltage. So what we did is we ordered a diode that's rated for the amperage that we expect to see here, because we want voltage to go here when we key it on, but we don't want voltage to come back into the ignition when it's keyed off, because sometimes you'll run into issues with the Jeep not wanting to turn off. Now that this wire is put in here, this alternator should charge the battery correctly and should last a long time. The other reason it's here is when he would fill it up with gas at the gas station, when the pump clicked off, all the gasoline would dump out. What's happening is it was leaking here because they literally just cut a hole in it and put in a couple of rivets. It's supposed to have 6, only 3 were in there. And they had it kind of held in there, which is fine until you try to fill the tank up to max capacity. Then it flows over and you dump a bunch of expensive gas on the ground. And then on this side, this hex threads into the plastic tank, and that pushes down on the ring here for the sending unit. This is not the original sending unit. We think that it's thinner maybe. And so this wasn't pushing down enough to give a good seal. And so what we've done is sourced this replacement fuel tank. That is what they call EFI ready. So that's electronic fuel injection. This tank's EFI ready, so a much better long-term solution. This is the original tank strap for the original fuel tank, and it just isn't gonna reach up to the top in the front where it's supposed to screw in. So what we're having to do is we're gonna be making some custom ones. You can actually buy these where they're completely flat and threaded on both ends instead of this one kind of having this notch mechanism. We can bring this down and I can show you the top. All right, so on the top here, so this is the sending unit. So that has a little float ball on the end of a rod, and that goes up and down with the fuel level, and it just changes the resistance. That's how the fuel gauge knows where your level's at. This is the fuel pump, the aftermarket one that generates high pressure for the fuel injection on the engine. These wires were just hardwired into the fuel pump, and to lower out the original tank, we had no choice but to just snip that. So one of the improvements we're doing, since we're here and we have the opportunity, is we put this weather-tight connector on it. It's called the Deutsch connector. That way these two clip together. You can see this gasket on here that's going to keep all of your elements out to prevent corrosion and that kind of thing. But it's serviceable. Push the little lock tab in on hooks, and then you're not having to cut wires and re-splice every time you want to drop the tank. And then this is the vent. Sorry, the top one, the smaller one is the vent. The bottom one is the fill, right? So this runs up to where you put the gas pump in. These are not the same size as the original. So we're having to adapt the hoses. So here's one. So the tank is going to take this smaller hose. This barb is actually 2 different diameters, and you can see this is a hose clamp that's heat activated. It's like shrink tube, but really strong. So it provides a really, really solid clamp on there so we don't get any fuel leaks or smelling like gasoline in your garage, that kind of thing. And then this diameter will fit into the existing hoses on the Jeep. So we've had to do that on this one. They are different colors just because this one happens to be a brass color. So this is going to be his fuel, the fuel fill hose. Just take an 1.25 inch here to a 1 inch, which is what the new tank has. After a couple days of work, she runs. So it came in originally because he said after about 40 minutes of driving, he'd start to lose power. The engine started running funny. And what I thought was strange is all he had to do was shut it off, turn it back on again. Pretty interesting. So we pop the hood, we see that it's got a Chevy engine in it. We checked the battery, the starter, the alternator. The alternator was not putting out current like it's supposed to. And now the alternator, for as long as we want to keep driving it, that alternator is always putting out current. We did find some other electrical issues with it. If you want to take a look here on the interior, this gauge has been replaced. This is a Dakota Digital, it's aftermarket. We started looking into that. We found some wiring issues with the Dakota Digital dash. Got those fixed. Now everything seems to be good to go. I guess probably won't be able to see much of this under here, but. So we have a new fuel tank. We had to make these custom tank straps because this tank, although it's meant for a CJ, it wasn't specifically meant for this CJ. This is a CJ8, and a lot of people don't know that that's even a thing. We love keeping cool and unique cars like this one on the road and better than ever. Follow us to keep up with some of the wild repairs and upgrades that come through the shop, and if we can help you with your car, shoot us a message on Facebook, Instagram, or at petersonperformance.com.